Dawson read for you just a minute ago from 2 Samuel chapter 12, those first 7 verses. It was the parable that Nathan, the illustration, if you will, the story that Nathan told David. Nathan was a prophet. David had messed up big time. You can read chapters 11 and 12 of 2 Samuel, and you can see what was going on. In fact, when you think about it, I don't know about you, but you go like to Walmart or Publix or any other grocery store or whatever, and as you go through the checkout line, you got those little newspaper doodads, National Enquirer, National Examiner, the Globe, etc., etc., etc. And there's nothing really like that in the Bible, is there? Or is there? 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. Let me share with you what was going on back then. David was in Jerusalem. He stayed in Jerusalem. The army went out to war. But this time, David did not go. He stayed in Jerusalem with the old men, the boys, and the women, the ones that were not 20 years old and upward and still able to bear a sword for the cause of God and his people, the nation of Israel at the time. And so he's in his palace, his place there, and he's up on the rooftop apparently, or up in one of the upper levels, kind of just gazing out over this amazing city of Jerusalem that he had helped conquer, and that, and he looks down, and on the roof of the house not too far away is this woman. So he says, hand me that spyglass over there. Hold on a second. And whoa, that woman don't got no clothes on. She is taking a bath on top of her house. What is that all about? And so he said, I'm the king. I can do whatever I want. She's pretty. I'd like to spend some time with her. Somebody go get that woman. And so they did. And when you look at that account, Bathsheba's name is only mentioned one time. Usually it's the wife of Uriah or whatever designation. I wonder how she felt about all that. We don't know because God didn't choose to tell us what her view of all that was. Did she come to David's place voluntarily? Was she forced? We don't know. But then, not too long after that, she sends a message to David and says, hey, David, I'm pregnant. David immediately realizes, I've got a problem. Something's got to give. I got to cover this up somehow. And so he sends a messenger to the army out on the battlefield and tells Joab, his commander, send Uriah the Hittite home. He needs to come home and spend some time with his wife. I want to be a nice guy. So Uriah comes back to Jerusalem. And David says, you've been out there fighting, you've been away from me. Go home to your wife, sleep with her, enjoy her company, and then you can go back. And Uriah didn't do that. He didn't go to his house. And when David said, why didn't you? He said, I'm not going to enjoy the company of my wife while my compatriots are out there on the battlefield risking their life every day without their spouses. And so David said, well, okay, I tell you, stay over one more night, and he got him drunk. And he figured, I'll get him drunk and he'll go. No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't do that at all. He had too much respect for his fellow soldiers that were on the battlefield. So David then wrote a letter. And in that letter, he said, put Uriah the Hittite right in the middle of the hottest fighting, hand-to-hand combat that you can find. And then when the enemy is right there, everybody back off so that he will be killed. And he rolled that letter up, sealed it with wax, put the king's signet ring on that wax seal, and sent it by Uriah himself to take to Joab, the commander of the army. And Uriah, as a good soldier, did exactly what he was told to do. And when Joab opened that scroll and read that letter, and it told him what to do, he got Uriah out there on the front lines with some of his fellow soldiers, and when the battle got hot, they were pressing it, everybody dropped back and left Uriah exposed to the enemy, and he was put to death. See, David thought, I can cover up my sin. Yes, I messed up. I messed up with Bathsheba. I recognize that. But I can fix this. I can fix this. I'll get her husband to go sleep with her, and then he'll think the baby's his. I can fix this. Well, that didn't happen. Well, I'll get him drunk, and he'll do it, and that didn't happen. And he said, I can still fix this. I'll have him put to death, and then there's nobody to be jealous, nobody to worry, and then I'll just take her, and it'll be okay. And that's what he did. I mean, that's a story that's so sensational, I'm not even sure the Inquirer would print it. Because who's going to believe somebody would do something like that? But he did. Why? Because he was trying to cover up his sin. And the man he was having put to death is the very one who he commissioned to deliver his own death sentence. How far will I go to try to cover my sin? Richard Speight wrote a book, and in that book he told the story of a judge who at one point was driving under the influence, and in doing that accidentally hit a man and killed him with his car. He pulled off the road and hid, and another man came down the road and ran over the man. And that second man was accused of vehicular homicide. And guess who the judge was that trial was held before? The one who had actually killed the man as he was driving under the influence. Doesn't say what happened. What would you do? Could he cover up his sin? Probably, in this life. We try so hard sometimes to hide what we do. And we know, I know, we know, God sees everything. You know, granted, it's nice to not have all of our mistakes paraded to people, but God sees them. And ultimately, whose forgiveness is it that I have to have if I'm going to get where I want to be? It's not just mine, it's God's. Now, when we offend someone, we need to strive to get that fixed and everyone be forgiven. But ultimately, if God doesn't forgive me, I'm in trouble. And I can't hide my sins from God. And so God sends Nathan. And Nathan goes to David and he says, hey, David, let me tell you about a couple of guys in your kingdom. There was a fellow lived over out in the country on the side of the road out there. He didn't have anything. Didn't have children, he had one little ewe lamb. He was a poor man. But this lamb was so special to him. I mean, he kept that thing in the house. He fed it as best he could. He took care of it. He kept it clean. He loved that little ewe lamb like it was a child, as if it was his daughter. And David, you know the special bond between a father and his daughter. You can't duplicate that anywhere else. This ewe lamb was incredibly special to this man. And there was a rich man that lived up the road from him that had all kinds of flocks. He had, hundreds of sheep. He had all kinds of sheep, and he had a fella come and visit with him. And they were going to fix a supper for the guy. And instead of going out and taking one of his many, many sheep that wouldn't even have been missed, he told a servant to go down there and steal that poor man's little ewe lamb that was like a child to him. And then he had that lamb killed and skinned and cooked, and he fed it to his visitor that had come, when he had all the sheep in the world that money could want, that he could want. He had anything money could buy, and yet he stole the one thing that poor man had and gave it to a visitor. And boy, David was angry. You saw, this man doesn't need to live. We're going to kill him. We're going to put this man to death. But before we do that, he's going to pay back this poor man 4 ewe lambs. He's going to give him 4 times what he took. Then we're going to kill him. Who is it? You wonder if David got so mad, maybe because he kind of might have had an idea of what Nathan was up to. He knew Nathan was a prophet. He knew that God spoke through him. Kind of wonder, maybe David was kind of beginning to understand maybe what he was about to say. And then in all of that anger, Nathan said, David, you are the rich man that stole the neighbor's lamb. And David, it hit him like a ton of bricks. 2x4 right upside the head, shot between the eyes. He knew. See, David knew all along, but he thought he could cover it up. Nathan made it very plain. No, you haven't covered it, and you can't. And when he sat down at some point shortly after this and wrote what we know as the 51st Psalm, he said in verse 3 of Psalm 51, my sin is always before me. David knew. If you read that psalm, you see how guilty he felt. He felt like he had never really done anything right. That, his mom was a sinner when he was born. He's a sinner now that he's an adult. I mean, he just, the whole family's a bunch, but he also knew that God forgives. And that was what was amazing about David. David was a man that God said through Samuel, I'm looking for a man after my own heart, when he was looking for someone to anoint as a king to replace Saul. David was that man. Does that mean David was perfect? Well, no. All you got to do is read 2 Samuel, chapters 11 and 12, and he was so far from perfect, it was unbelievable. And that's not the only thing. I mean, there were other times when tens of thousands of people died because David decided to do what he wanted instead of what God wanted. And yet, he was a man after God's own heart, because every time he messed up, he recognized that the primary one against whom he had sinned was God. Even in this case, it wasn't Uriah as such. It wasn't Bathsheba as such. He said, against you, God, I have sinned. David understood. Perfect? No. Forgiven? Yes. Just like you and I can be if we follow the will of God. But as if God never, in a sense, wanted David to forget, what he had done. By inspiration, when you go to 2 Samuel chapter 23 and you look at verse 39, that last verse, the 37 great men of David's army, who's the last one listed? Uriah the Hittite. 37 of them in all. Uriah had been dead for a while, and yet God said, when this is written, his name is still going to be in the record as being one of the great men in David's army. David knew, no doubt in my mind, he knew that he was forgiven. But I feel like probably like Paul knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that he was forgiven of that earlier time as Saul, when he voted to have men and women put to death. Children didn't matter. He didn't care if they had children or not. They claimed that this Jesus of Nazareth was the Christ, the promised one. Well, we can't have that. That's blasphemy against God. Put him to death. And that's what he did. And then as he was introduced on the road to Damascus to Jesus, and he put away his sin with a penitent heart and was buried in the waters of baptism to wash those sins away, Acts 22:16, he knew he was forgiven. He wrote regularly about the amazing grace of God, and as he wrote to the Corinthians, the indescribable gift of his Son. And yet, there's no doubt in my mind that from time to time, as night fell, and maybe he's laying on a ship looking up at the stars in the Mediterranean, or perhaps one of the 3 times he's hanging on to some flotsam and trying to stay afloat in the Mediterranean after a shipwreck and looking up in the night at those stars. I don't doubt at all that there were times, even forgiven, he saw Stephen's face as he said, "Do not lay this sin to their charge." He saw the faces of those men and women that he had drug away from their children out of their houses and then had them put to death. He knew he was forgiven. But those things don't just disappear. Trust me on that. They don't. We cannot hide our sin from God. We can't hide our sin from ourselves. And we can, however, know that with a penitent heart and an obedient life, God will forgive us of those sins, and as he promised through Jeremiah, he will remember those sins no more. Can I cover up my sins? No. However, another question needs to be asked. Who is there that has the power not to cover up sin, but to actually remove sin? That's Jesus Christ. Remember that lamb in Nathan's parable that was put to death and fed to the rich? John chapter 1, verse 29. John the baptizer, seeing Jesus coming, pointed to him and told the people that were listening, "Behold, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world." I can't hide my sin. You can't hide your sin. We can't hide our sins. But one drop of the blood of Jesus Christ has the power to forgive every sin that's ever been committed from the time of Adam until the Lord returns, if we are found faithful to him, obedient to him. If you love me, he said, keep my commandments. Am I doing that? Then folks, I don't need to live in the guilt of my past sins. Is the factual knowledge of what I did going to be there? Yeah, unless somehow the Lord blesses you with a forgettery that works really well, yes. I'm going to remember the crazy, dumb, ignorant things I've done, the wrong things I've done. But do I live my life in guilt? No, not at all. Not if I'm forgiven. And God Almighty has said, I'll do that for you. When with a believing heart and a penitent heart, Acts 3:19, Hebrews 11:6, you turn from that sin, confess my Son's name, Romans 10:9 and 10, and be immersed, that is, baptized, which is what the word means, Acts 2:38, Mark 16:16, for the forgiveness or remission of your sins, I will do exactly that. I will forgive them. And though God will never forget the fact that I sinned, He will forget the deserved consequence and the guilt that those sins should have brought to my existence. He lets all that go in the blood of His Son. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 7. Colossians chapter 1, verse 14. We are forgiven through His blood according to the grace of God. And when that grace teaches me, Titus 2, that I need to live a godly life, that means being obedient to the will of God. Those are the terms of the gift of grace. Have I done that? Have I been baptized into Christ so I can put Him on? Galatians chapter 3, verses 26 and 27. You know, we mentioned in our class this morning that in Paul's writings, he uses the phrase in Christ 164 times. Why? Because God inspired him based on his experience to make sure that people understand all the blessings, Ephesians 1, all of the salvation, all of that is found in Christ. And if all spiritual blessings are in Christ, then there are no spiritual blessings outside Christ, which is where I will be if I think that I, on my own, can hide my sins. David learned. We should learn. And if a response is part of that learning process, just come down front while we stand and sing.